I was deep into the Shikoku pilgrimage, the legendary 88 Temple Henro, a 1,200-year-old route that snakes through cities, mountains, beaches, rice paddies, and dense forests. It was midsummer. Most sane people avoid walking it then because of the crushing heat, humidity, and sudden typhoons. But I was young, stubborn, broke, and foreign. I didn't speak or read Japanese. That meant I relied entirely on the kindness of strangers, the quiet blessing pilgrims receive when they walk in white. I had already covered most of the 1,000 miles alone, sleeping in temple bell towers, right under a massive bronze bell the night after an earthquake, in priests' garages next to sports cars, and even in an old roadside bus with two chain-smoking homeless men. Every night brought a new strange bed. Then my best friend Japanese, fluent, finally free from his schedule, joined me for the final stretch. We reached Zentsuji, the largest temple on the island, and checked our list of pilgrim lodgings. One entry simply said house with a phone number. After the house that had turned out to be an outdoor rest stop with benches, I was skeptical. My friend called. The woman on the line was firm. Only non-Japanese people are allowed to stay. Japanese people are strictly prohibited. We exchanged a look. Almost no foreigners walk the full Henro. The rule made zero sense. We decided to bend the truth. He'd pretend to stay at a hotel, and we'd both use the house. The temple priests handed us the keys without comment and drew a simple map. The place was tucked behind commercial buildings, down a narrow alley. When we finally stood in front of it, a wave of pure dread hit us both at the same time. It was a big, old, traditional Japanese manor, 2 stories, dark wood, tiled roof. Beautiful, but something about it felt wrong. The air itself seemed heavier. We stepped inside. The house was completely empty and spotlessly clean. Tatami mats, rice paper screens, nothing else. The dread only grew stronger. I told myself it was just ignorance, playing tricks, and suggested we explore together. Room by room we went, each one pristine. We found a few rolled futons in one closet and claimed the room. When I wanted to check upstairs, my friend shook his head. "You go. I'm good down here." Upstairs, the dread thickened. Every time I slid open a door, a fleeting mental image flashed. A woman or girl with long black hair standing silently, facing me. I also had the uncanny sensation of being watched not from one direction, but from everywhere at once. One presence all around me. Nothing visible happened, so we tried to shake it off and went to eat. Across the alley, a woman who ran a small tavern waved us over. She was delighted to host 2 pilgrims. We spent hours eating, drinking, laughing, and swapping stories as the sky turned black and a typhoon began to roll in. For a while, we forgot the house. The moment we stepped back inside, the dread slammed into us again. But rain hammered the roof, so we stayed. That's when things became impossible to explain. The central living room was suddenly full of cats, 50 to 100 of them, all black or white. No calicos, no tabbies, no other colors. The house had been locked tight when we left. No windows were open, no one had been inside, yet here they were, silent and watchful. We retreated to our futon room and closed the sliding doors, telling ourselves they'd find their own way out. We both woke up at exactly 2:30 a.m., no noise, no thunder, no reason, just racing hearts and wide-eyed alertness in perfect unison. The room felt stuffy, so I slid open the paper doors. The cats were gone. Not a single hair or paw print remained. We tried to read ourselves back to sleep. Once drowsy again, I reached up to close the doors, and a long lock of black hair slowly lowered from above, dangling right in front of my eyes before falling softly into my lap. At the exact same moment, across the room, a thick lock of coarse gray hair like an old woman's dropped onto my friend. There was no vent. The ceiling was solid wood with traditional airtight joinery. No cracks, no gaps. I searched every adjacent room. Nothing. We moved our futons to opposite corners and tried again. Same thing. Black hair for me, gray for him, falling at the same instant, landing in my open book. That was enough. We pulled the blankets over our heads despite the 80-degree heat and lay there, hearts pounding, waiting for morning. A furious banging on the front door woke us. My friend opened it. The woman from the phone stood there, livid. Japanese people cannot stay in this house. We packed in record time and practically ran out. It took us a full week before we could even talk about what happened. Later, I looked things up. In Japan, the witching hour is considered 2 to 3 a.m. The most common ghost in folklore, the yurei, is a woman with long, black, or sometimes gray hair. Shikoku itself carries an ancient nickname, Land of the Dead. Nearly every pilgrim comes home with at least one story they can't explain. Mine just happens to be a locked house that filled with silent cats, raining hair from nowhere, and a presence that watched us from every direction at once. I still don't have a rational explanation, but I know what I felt, what we both saw, and what fell from empty air. Some places on that ancient trail remember things the rest of the world has forgotten. I've waited years to tell this story properly. Most people smile politely and change the subject, but my sister remembers it exactly the same way I do. She was 8, I was 13. We grew up in the deep backwoods of Texas, the kind where your backyard ends and a national preserve forest begins. Endless trees, thick undergrowth, and silence that feels alive. My sister and I wandered those woods all the time. Strangely, we never got lost. No matter how far we walked, we always knew the way home. One late afternoon, she wanted to go exploring again. We yelled to Mom that we were heading into the woods. The usual be back before dark warning followed us in. We stopped at the makeshift fort we'd built a few hundred feet in. Got bored quickly and kept walking, picking up sticks, talking, doing what kids do. About 30 minutes later, I noticed the light was fading faster than it should have. That's when my sister grabbed my arm. Through the dense trees ahead, we could see what looked like a clearing. That didn't make sense. I knew these woods well. There were no clearings anywhere near us. Still, I convinced her to go check it out. Maybe it was just a trick of the light. It wasn't. We stepped into a wide, grassy clearing under a sky that had grown strangely dark. The wind had picked up, making the tall grass sway and whisper. Right in the middle of the open space stood a 2-story house. There was no road, no driveway, no path. We circled the entire clearing, hearts beating faster, looking for any sign of how a house could possibly be there. Nothing. Not even a faint tire track or worn footpath. Just untouched woods surrounding perfect grass. We walked back to the spot where we'd entered and just stared. The house looked old but well-kept, white paint, dark shutters, solid and quiet. The dread I felt was heavy, almost physical. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. My little sister clutched my hand so tightly her nails dug into my skin. Then I noticed it. In the top right window, a light was flickering. Something inside was rocking back and forth, blocking the light, then letting it through, blocking it again. Slow, steady. My sister suddenly squeezed my hand even harder. I looked down, annoyed, trying to pull free. That's when she started crying. "It's waving at us," she whispered. I looked back up. The rocking shape had raised an arm. It was waving. A slow, deliberate, human-like wave right at us. That snapped me out of it. I yanked her hand, and we ran. We ran hard for what felt like 10 minutes before we suddenly burst back into our old fort. I was confused. We had walked much farther farther than that. The sky was strangely brighter again, but I didn't care. We caught our breath for a few seconds, then ran the rest of the way home. By the time we reached the house, we had stopped crying, but Mom took one look at us and knew something was wrong. My sister told her everything. I got in trouble for making up scary stories and scaring my little sister. We dropped it after that, but I never forgot. Years passed. 2 years ago, my dad passed away. My sister and I were at Mom's house grieving together. Late one night after Mom had gone to bed, I brought it up. As soon as I mentioned that house in the woods, my sister froze. She remembered every single detail, the exact window, the rocking, the waving, the dread, the impossible location, everything. She had even asked our dad about it once, years earlier. He laughed and told her there was nothing but woods for miles in every direction. He'd grown up there. He would have known. The next day, I went back into the forest alone. I spent hours searching. I found nothing but trees. To this day, neither of us can explain what we saw. A house with no road, in the middle of protected National Preserve land. Something inside that waved at two scared kids. A place that shouldn't exist and apparently doesn't anymore. All I know is that it was real. We both felt that dread. We both saw it wave. And sometimes, even now at 32 years old, remembering it still makes me shake. You always hear that the scariest thing in the woods isn't a bear or a coyote, it's another person. I learned that lesson the hard way in 2015. A few friends and I had planned a 3-night backpacking trip on the North Country Trail through Pennsylvania's Allegheny National Forest. 2 of the guys were the type who are chronically late and terrible at planning, so instead of reaching the trailhead by dusk, we spent the entire day waiting on them. By 10 p.m., we were finally driving down pitch-black, secluded forest roads, searching for a tucked-away parking area. Midnight came and went. We were seriously considering just sleeping next to the car and starting fresh in the morning when we rounded a sharp bend and saw lights strung up through the trees. An old RV sat parked off the road with a campfire crackling nearby. 3 people were hanging around it. We pulled over. I figured the locals might know exactly where the trailhead was. As soon as we stopped, 2 of them started walking toward our car. The third person stayed by the fire. The first woman was loud, drunk, and weirdly chatty in that overly friendly way some people get when they're hammered. She asked what we were doing, where we were going, how we were doing the whole routine. Then she asked where we were from. A little town outside Pittsburgh, we told her. Her whole demeanor flipped like a switch. Pittsburgh? She repeated, louder. They're from Pittsburgh. Fucking Pittsburgh. Why the hell are they up here? Her voice grew more aggressive. Look at them. They're from Pittsburgh. The friendly mask was gone. The guy by the fire killed the music. Suddenly, everything went quiet except for the crackling logs. The second woman, who had stayed back along the side of the road about a dozen yards away, hadn't said a single word the entire time. Then we heard it. The unmistakable metallic shick of a pistol slide being racked. The air got thick. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. We stood there frozen while this woman held a gun somewhere in the darkness just off the road. After a few long, agonizing seconds, one of us managed to break the silence with the most casual voice we could fake. So, the trailhead should be about a mile up the road? Yeah, the pistol woman answered flatly. Cool, thanks. We got back in the car, trying not to look like we were rushing, and drove off as quickly as the winding road allowed. We passed the actual trailhead, kept going a little farther, and ended up sleeping in a random spot off in the woods that night. The rest of the trip was beautiful. The North Country Trail is genuinely one of the prettiest stretches of forest I've ever hiked, but I've never forgotten that midnight stop. So if you ever go backpacking in the Alleghenies, enjoy the trails. Just don't stop to ask for directions after dark, and definitely stay away from the meth heads. I was 13 when my dad and stepmom bought the house about 25 minutes outside of town. It sat on a quiet road that used to be called Mount Zion. If you followed that winding, tree-lined road for about 35 minutes, you'd reach a small, forgotten cemetery with the same name. My cousin was visiting for a couple of weeks that first summer. We were both little assholes at the time, full-blown Jackass fans who thought being edgy was the height of comedy. One afternoon, we decided to walk down to the old cemetery. We spent a while wandering between the graves, cracking jokes about the names we could still read, kicking lightly at worn headstones, and generally being disrespectful little shits. A lot of the graves were so old the stones had eroded into blank white lumps sticking out of the ground. We thought it was hilarious. The next day, I overheard my parents talking in the kitchen in low, serious voices. The conversation stopped the second they noticed us. When I asked my stepmom what was going on, she brushed it off as grown-up stuff and said she'd promised my dad not to talk about it. Later that night, after my dad had gone to bed and a few beers had loosened her up, she finally told us. Around 3 or 4 a.m., my dad had woken up completely paralyzed. Their bedroom was full of people, silent figures standing all around the bed, just staring down at him. He tried to move, tried to call out to my stepmom, but nothing worked. Every time he closed his eyes and opened them again, they were still there, glaring. Eventually, after what felt like forever, he managed to squeeze his eyes shut long enough that when he opened them, the room was empty. Only then could he finally move and wake my stepmom. My cousin and I sat there, wide-eyed. The house had already felt off since we moved in random weird noises and sensations we could usually explain away, but this was different. My dad had always been a hardcore skeptic. Ghosts, to him, were either overactive imaginations or people looking for attention. The fact that he was visibly shaken and didn't even want us to know about it hit hard. A couple of days later, it happened to him again. Same time, same silent crowd surrounding the bed, maybe once or twice more after that. I started connecting the dots in that dramatic 13-year-old way, and half-jokingly, half-seriously suggested to my cousin that we go back to the cemetery and apologize. Maybe the people in the room were angry about how we'd acted on their graves. We walked back down that long road feeling ridiculous, but we did it anyway. We stood there in the quiet cemetery and apologized out loud to the old stones for being disrespectful, for disturbing the place, for acting like idiots. We felt stupid as hell talking to the air, but we meant it. After that, the visitors never came back. My dad never had another episode again. He'd never experienced anything like it before, and it never happened after. Coincidence? Probably. But it was enough to make me wonder. 15 years later, that house still does strange things. Almost everyone who stays there has a story, footsteps, shadows, voices, objects moving. My dad's gone from total non-believer to simply saying, "It's a weird fucking house, and we don't kick headstones anymore." There was a stretch of my childhood where everything felt off in the house we lived in. It wasn't some ancient haunted building with a tragic backstory. We actually met the man who built it just a few years before we moved in. As far as anyone knew, it had no history. It was just wrong. The backyard was almost an entire acre, with a separate guest house my dad used as his study. We lost an unusual number of pets while we lived there, often in strange ways. My childhood cat was found dead and splayed out in a planter box. We assumed she fell from the tree above it. Our dogs had puppies, several stillborn. We kept the father and 2 of his sons. One son was found flattened in the street. The other died from overeating. Then we got a new dog as a companion. The neighbors accused it of killing their goats. They showed a fully tanned hide as proof, and gave my parents an ultimatum: pay for new goats or put the dog down. They chose to euthanize him. Our last dog simply ran away and was never seen again. Even our ancient family dog, who had been around since before I was born, attacked my mom the day before I left to visit relatives, something he had never done. We later discovered he was full of maggots from wounds caused by a toxic plant in our backyard. He was gone before I returned, but the supernatural stuff was what really stuck with me. One night, I was told to take compost out to the far end of the backyard. It was dark. As I walked, I saw a figure standing just a few feet away, silently watching me. I instantly knew who it was, a friend of my grandparents who had died about a month earlier. I didn't see his face clearly, but the recognition hit me like a gut feeling, deeper than thought. I dropped everything and ran. Years later, I was home alone one evening. The house was built strangely extremely long instead of tall. 5 bedrooms stretched out in a single-story line, with a long central hallway that felt like the spine of the building. I was sitting in the living room when I started hearing the usual creaks and cracks of the house settling. Then I felt it, a presence hiding in the darkened hallway, just out of sight, watching me from the shadows. I sat there frozen until I couldn't take it anymore and left the room. The worst experience happened on another night when I was alone again. I went to the kitchen for a snack, then started walking back down the long hallway toward my bedroom. The second I stepped into the hallway, I felt something at the far end. I tried to ignore it and kept walking. As I got within just a few feet of my bedroom door, a massive, hulking figure came rushing straight toward me out of the darkness. Pure instinct took over. I sprinted the last few steps, slammed my bedroom door behind me, and stood there staring at it, waiting. My heart was hammering. I expected pounding on the door, or the handle to turn, or something, but nothing happened. After a few minutes, the heavy presence simply vanished. The house fell completely silent for the rest of the night. We eventually moved out of that house. I still don't know what was wrong with it. The builder seemed normal. No tragic history, no dramatic explanations. Just a modern house on a big lot that felt like it hated us, especially the pets, and especially me when I was alone in that long, shadowed hallway. When I was in my early 20s, I worked as a night security guard at a very old cemetery on the East Coast. At first, the job felt creepy and interesting, but after a couple of weeks, that feeling disappeared. Most nights were just annoying. Teenagers would sneak in after closing, knock over gravestones, spray paint monuments, break mausoleum windows, and trash the place for fun. That genuinely made me angry. I could tolerate kids sneaking in to smoke weed or hang out, but destroying graves? That felt disgusting. Some of those monuments cost thousands of dollars, and more importantly, they were someone's final resting place. The cemetery itself was massive and nearly 250 years old. It sat in a heavily wooded area full of hills, valleys, and thick groves of ancient trees. The graves weren't arranged in neat rows either. There were family plots hidden between trees, old crypts on hillsides, and winding paths that disappeared into dark pockets of forest. At night, the place felt endless. By the time I had worked there for a year, I knew every corner of that cemetery, every path, every hidden clearing, even certain family names on the mausoleums. One summer night during an overnight shift, I was driving around close to 4 a.m., when a motion sensor alarm went off near the side of the cemetery closest to a local university. Immediately, I assumed it was college kids again. It was mid-July, hot and humid, and I was already irritated before I even got there. I decided to park my security cart a few paths away so nobody would hear the engine or see the headlights coming. I quietly walked through the cemetery with my flashlight off. The trees were huge overhead, blocking most of the moonlight. I remember passing the old Johnston family mausoleum because I knew there was a small clearing just around the corner and people usually gathered there. So I turned the corner, expecting to catch someone, but the clearing was empty. No people, no movement, no sound, not even the smell of cigarettes or weed. I stood there, confused for a second, and started scanning the area with my flashlight. Still nothing. Then I stepped onto the small stone entrance of the mausoleum and rested my hand against one of the pillars while looking back out into the clearing. That's when I saw it. At first, it looked like a patch of darkness, but not normal darkness. This thing was darker than everything around it. It looked almost like a black cloud standing upright in the middle of the clearing. And the second I noticed it, I felt pure terror. Not fear like hearing a noise in the dark. Real terror. The kind that hits your body instantly before your brain even understands why. The only thought in my head was, this is how I die. For a few seconds, I tried convincing myself it was just a shadow from the trees. My brain kept trying to make sense of it, but then I realized the shape was moving, and it was moving toward me. The closer it got, the worse that feeling became. It felt like the thing had noticed me, and now it was coming straight for me. I turned and ran. I sprinted back through the cemetery paths, jumped into the security cart, and shoved the key into the ignition. The headlights turned on, pointing directly toward the clearing ahead. And that was the part that scared me the most. The headlights lit up the trees, the grass, the gravestones, everything except the shape. The light didn't touch it at all. It was like staring at a hole in reality, a moving void. My eyes could see everything around it, but not the thing itself. Just this black emptiness where light completely disappeared, and it was still moving. I slammed the cart into drive and sped back toward the administration building on the newer side of the cemetery where there were street lamps and brighter lights. When I finally stopped and looked behind me, there was nothing there anymore. No shadow, no movement, just silence and the adrenaline still hitting me like a truck. After that night, alarms kept going off in that same area a few more times. Twice during the night and once during the day. I refused to go back there alone. I didn't care anymore if kids were sneaking in. If they broke a gravestone, I'd deal with it after sunrise. A few days later, I told my boss what happened. I expected her to laugh it off completely. Instead, she smiled and said, "Oh yeah, people have been talking about that for years. They call it the shade." I asked her what she meant, and she casually explained that multiple employees had reported seeing a black moving figure in that exact part of the cemetery over the years. She personally had never seen it herself, but she talked about it like it was just another normal part of the job. I never went near that clearing again. Sometimes during daytime patrols, I'd stop on a nearby hill overlooking the area and stare down into the trees, half expecting to see something standing there. I never did. And honestly, I never wanted to. This isn't a paranormal story, but honestly, it scares me more than most ghost stories. I was raised by my grandparents, and every summer they would take me camping. One year we decided to try a new campsite deep in the woods. Everything seemed normal for the first few days. Then one night, I suddenly woke up while my grandma was carefully passing me out of the tent to my grandpa. I was confused and about to ask what was happening, but my grandpa immediately covered my mouth with his hand and whispered, "Shh." I remember seeing my grandma quietly walking uphill toward the truck while my grandpa carried me behind her. Nobody was talking. Nobody turned on any lights. Everything felt tense. My grandma got into the truck first, and my grandpa handed me to her through the door. Then he slowly closed it as quietly as possible. And the second it shut, he took off running around the truck, jumped into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and floored it out of the campsite. I had never seen him act like that before. He drove for a long time through the dark, and eventually I fell asleep in the back seat. When I woke up again, it was morning, and we were parked outside a sheriff's station. I still had no idea what was going on. My grandpa went into the station to talk to someone while my grandma sat with me in the waiting area. Later, a female officer came and sat with me while both of my grandparents disappeared into the back offices. After a while, a couple sheriff deputies followed us back to the campsite. When we arrived, the entire place had been destroyed. I had to stay inside the truck while the officers looked around and took pictures. I remember them stuffing all our camping gear into trash bags. Sleeping bags, pillows, clothes, everything. What upset me most was seeing them throw away my Little Mermaid sleeping bag and pillow. I was still little, and I started crying and throwing a fit because I wanted them back. That's when my grandpa suddenly screamed at me to get back in the truck. It shocked me because he had never yelled at me before in my entire life. We packed up what was left, cut the trip short, and drove home. On the way back, my grandparents stopped at a small carnival to cheer me up, and eventually the whole thing faded into this weird childhood memory I never fully understood. Years later, when I was a teenager, I finally asked my grandma what really happened that night. She told me my grandpa had gotten up during the night to go pee somewhere away from the tent. While he was out there, he heard people walking up the trail toward our campsite. At first, he thought it might just be other campers, then he heard them talking. According to my grandpa, they were saying things like, "It's just two old people and a little kid." The moment he heard that, he knew something was wrong. He quietly went back to the tent, woke my grandma without making noise, grabbed me, and got us out of there as fast as possible. They didn't even know where the sheriff's station was, so they hid at a gas station until morning and asked for directions once it opened. Nobody ever found out who those people were or how many there had been, but when the police searched the campsite, it became obvious those people hadn't come there for a harmless prank. They completely trashed everything. Someone had literally defecated inside the ice chest. They used our sleeping bags to wipe themselves. They urinated all over the bedding. They even tried to burn the tent down, but thankfully it didn't fully catch fire. And then my grandma quietly told me the worst part. Right before I started crying over my pillow, they had discovered some strange white substance all over it. They believed someone had masturbated onto it. That was why my grandpa snapped at me when I tried grabbing it. He was already overwhelmed, terrified, and trying to protect me from understanding what had almost happened. Even now, years later, I still get chills thinking about it, because whatever those people planned to do that night, my grandparents interrupted it just in time. A few years ago, I had one of the strangest nights of my life, and to this day, I still can't fully explain it. At the time, I was living in Texas with my girlfriend and our 2 indoor cats. One night, she was out of state for work, so I was home alone. I went to bed like normal and fell asleep without any problems. Sometime in the middle of the night, I suddenly woke up freezing cold. Not normal cold either. I mean ice cold. I actually like sleeping in cooler temperatures, especially during Texas summers, so the AC usually stayed around 70 degrees or lower. But this felt completely different. I was buried under blankets, yet my whole body felt numb with cold. Still half asleep, I grabbed my phone to check the time. The screen wouldn't turn on. I pressed the power button a few times, but nothing happened. At first, I just assumed the battery had died. I got out of bed to adjust the thermostat, and that's when I noticed something else strange. The cats were gone. Normally they slept either on the bed or somewhere nearby every single night, but now the room felt completely empty and silent. I walked over to the thermostat and realized it wasn't working either. The screen was dead, no power. At that point, I figured the electricity must have gone out, so I looked through the upstairs window toward the neighboring houses, but their lights were all still on. Only my house seemed dead. The entire thing had probably taken less than 2 minutes so far, but the deeper I got into the house, the more wrong everything felt. I started heading downstairs to grab some water, and halfway there, I froze. There was light coming from the first floor. That made no sense. The upstairs had no power, yet downstairs there was this dim glow spilling into the hallway. Because of the way my house was built, I couldn't actually see the room until I got closer to the stairs. Then I heard something, a low, humming noise. It sounded mechanical, almost electrical, high-pitched with random deep pulses mixed into it, like a muffled machine running somewhere inside the house. As I slowly walked farther down the stairs, I finally saw movement. There was a dark figure standing in the lit room below. It was moving slowly. I only took one more step before something happened that I still can't explain properly. The best description I have is that it felt like the floor disappeared underneath me, like I had stepped off a cliff or been pulled downward instantly, and then nothing. I completely lost all feeling in my body. The next thing I remember is waking up in bed to my morning alarm. Everything looked normal again. The cats were back asleep beside me. The house had power. My phone worked perfectly. For a few minutes, I just sat there trying to process what had happened. It felt too real to be a dream. Every detail was crystal clear in my head. That's when I checked my security app. My system logs every time a door opens or closes, and immediately I noticed something was wrong. The security system had been disarmed during the night, and according to the app, the front door had opened and closed multiple times while I was asleep. That instantly put me on edge. So I checked the footage from my exterior security cameras. There was nothing there. The last clip recorded was a random car driving by around 10 p.m. Then absolutely nothing until another car passed in the morning. No people, no movement, no footage at all. It was like several hours had simply vanished. I even asked my neighbor across the street to check his cameras. I lied and told him I thought someone had broken into my truck. But when he reviewed his footage, the exact same thing had happened. A massive time gap during the night. No recordings whatsoever. At that point, I started questioning my own memory. Maybe I had been sleepwalking. Maybe it really was some kind of vivid dream. But one detail kept bothering me. When I looked out the upstairs window that night, I clearly remembered seeing a red pickup truck parked outside my neighbor's house, facing the wrong direction. That detail stuck with me because years earlier, I had actually gotten a ticket for parking the wrong way on a street, so I always notice it. When I checked the camera footage from before bed, the truck wasn't there. But in the morning footage, it was. That means I really did wake up during the night and see it. And there were still more things that didn't make sense. The downstairs light was left on, even though I knew I had turned it off before bed. The security system had been disarmed, even though I always armed it at night. And then there was the smell. My entire body smelled like burnt marshmallows. That's the only way I can describe it. Sweet, smoky, burned sugar. But the weirdest part of all was downstairs near the entryway. I had a 55-gallon fish tank sitting near the staircase. By morning, nearly 2/3 of the water was gone. Over 40 gallons had somehow disappeared overnight. There was no leak, no puddle. The carpet and floor around the tank were completely dry, and somehow the fish were perfectly fine. To this day, I still have no explanation for any of it, but whatever happened in that house that night felt terrifyingly real.
This happened when I was a teenager living on the west coast of Australia, and it's still the scariest experience of my life. One night, me and 3 friends decided to camp out at a beach near a residential area. There were 2 guys and 2 girls in our group. We were bored teenagers with nothing better to do, so we snuck out there late at night, made a small bonfire in the sand dunes, and planned to stay until morning. The beach itself wasn't a popular place at night. Bonfires were technically restricted there, and most people avoided the area after dark. The nearby houses were almost completely blacked out, except for a few distant streetlights. By around 3 a.m., we were all exhausted. At one point, the group split up. The other guy and girl went back to the car to grab more supplies while me and my friend stayed near the fire. I was lying in my sleeping bag staring into the flames when I heard a strange sound behind us. At first, it was soft, almost like a high-pitched screech mixed in with the crackling of the fire. But within seconds, it became something else entirely. The noise suddenly turned into a full-blown scream. A woman screaming in absolute terror. Not yelling, not laughing. It sounded like someone was being murdered in the darkness behind us. The scream echoed across the beach and dunes so loudly that both of us instantly jumped up and ran toward the direction where our other friends had gone. We genuinely thought our female friend was being attacked, but when we reached the car, both of them were completely fine. And that's when things got worse, because they had heard the screaming too. They thought it was me. Now all 4 of us were standing together near the car while the screaming continued somewhere out in the darkness near our campsite. The worst part was that we couldn't tell where it was coming from. The sound echoed strangely across the dunes. 1 second, it sounded far away. Then suddenly, it felt close. It almost seemed like it was coming from every direction at once, and it was pitch black out there.
We grabbed a few tools from the car in case we needed to defend ourselves and carefully started heading back toward the campsite. Nobody used flashlights because we didn't want whoever was out there to see us coming. We barely even spoke. Mostly we communicated by touching each other's arms or shoulders, so we wouldn't lose track of one another in the dark. We only made it a short distance down the sandy path before we heard something else. A deep cough, not far away either. Close enough that every one of us froze instantly. We still couldn't see anything, but now we could hear movement in the darkness. Shuffling sounds somewhere ahead of us in the dunes. Then came another sound, dragging, like something heavy being pulled across the sand. At that point, my imagination was completely spiraling. Every horrible possibility was running through my head. Then we heard the cough again, and every instinct in my body screamed at me to get out of there immediately. So we ran. All 4 of us, quietly but as fast as possible, rushed back to the car, jumped inside, and drove a short distance down the road near some houses where there was at least a little light. The problem was that only one of us actually had a driver's license, and we'd all been casually drinking because we planned to stay overnight. Nobody wanted to risk driving any farther, so we stayed inside the car until sunrise. The entire time, we kept staring toward the entrance path leading into the dunes, waiting to see if something or someone would come out. At one point during the night, another car pulled up in the distance. A man inside just sat there watching us for nearly 20 minutes. Nobody got out, nobody spoke, he just watched. Eventually, we got uncomfortable enough to approach the vehicle ourselves, but the second we started moving toward him, he drove away immediately. A couple hours later, a security patrol car happened to pass by and stopped to ask why we were parked there. We explained everything that happened, but the guard didn't seem interested at all. He didn't investigate and didn't call anyone either. And back then, none of us even had cell phones to call for help ourselves. Once the sun finally came up, we went back to the campsite to put out the fire properly and check the area. There was nothing there. there. No blood, no signs of a fight, no footprints that stood out, nothing. Whatever we heard during the night had completely vanished. For weeks afterward, I checked local newspapers and watched the news, expecting to hear about a missing person, an attack, or a body being found near that beach, but nothing ever came up. To this day, I still don't know what we heard out there in the dunes that night. But I know one thing for sure. Every single one of us was terrified. Even the guys who normally laughed everything off were completely serious and protective the entire night. Whatever was out there, it was real enough to send all four of us running for our lives.